Today we're going to start Doctrine and Covenants. Oh, whoops. Sorry. Uh, where art thou? Doctrine and Covenants 121 to 123. These are the writings that Joseph Smith did in Liberty Jail. And as far as I'm aware, because I've never been there, this is sort of a good depiction in this picture because the windows, it says, were small and had bars on them and were too high for them to look out of. Um, and the walls were about 4 foot thick, um, so they couldn't really get out of what they were. Uh, and I just thought I'd read this first part and really get into the details of 121 to 123 in the next few days. The bottom of Liberty Jail in Missouri was known as the dungeon. The walls were thick, and the stone floor was cold, and the food filthy. Food was scarce and rotten, and two narrow iron-barred windows near the ceiling allowed very little light. This is where Joseph Smith and a few others spent their frigid months during the winter of 1838 to 1839, receiving news about the suffering of the saints. The peace and the optimism felt in far west. Peace and op- felt in sorry, the peace and optimism felt in far west had lasted only a few months, and now the saints were without a home, once again driven into the wilderness in search of yet another place to start over, this time with their prophet in prison. Yet, even in that miserable jail, knowledge from heaven came pouring down. Joseph's question, O God, where art thou? Was answered powerfully, Fear not, for God shall be with you forever and ever. And we're really going to get into that. Um, I did go into within the walls of Liberty Jail, which I think is too much, a lot of reading. Um, so I'm not going to read very much, but one of the people in there was Caleb Baldwin. The other prisoners were the First Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, in other words, Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith, Sidney Rigdon, as well as Lemon White and Alexander McRae. So we have 6 in there, and really, it's the final episode of the events in Missouri before they leave Missouri for good, and um, they all experienced a lot. Um, Portions of what Joseph Smith wrote to the saints are in 121, 122, and 123. Notice it says portions. I don't know that a little bit later in here it tells us how many pages, which is 29 pages. Could you imagine 29 pages if he wrote everything? But he wrote everything he knew of the problems in Missouri so that people knew that he also, not only that he knew this, but that he was documenting it, I believe, for future to share with other government officials in the um, government higher up, including the President of the United States. Um, And Joseph wrote his experience and other incarcerated men provides additional insights. Baldwin himself being one. Baldwin had was 47 years old and had 10 children and longed to be with the family during the 4 month confinement. Um, his physical and emotional problems, and if you can imagine, I just can't even imagine um, how horrible it'd be in there, especially when you felt that you hadn't done anything wrong. It's interesting here that it mentions that the Latter-day Saints in Jackson County numbered about 1,000, which is a third of the population. So that was the ones in Jackson County, a third of the population in Jackson County at the time when they were expelled. Um, Even after the Latter-day Saints moved to Caldwell County in northwestern Missouri, which had been created by the state legislature exclusively for them, battles continued, and it was called the Missouri Mormon War. We have DeWitt, Blue River, Crooked River, and Hans Mill. I don't know how much we'll talk about those, but they are well documented. It's also where um, David W. Panton dies in one of those as well. So the total number of arraigned saints was 64. Um, so they all had to go before magistrates. Um, or Judge Austin A. King. And he said he singled out Baldwin and offered him freedom if he would renounce and forsake Joseph Smith um, as a prophet. Of course, Baldwin didn't, and um, other detainees that were singled out and asked the same question returned an answer similar to that of Baldwin. Um, so they um, locked away several leaders: Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith, Sidney Rigdon, Lyman White, Alexander McRae, Caleb Baldwin were there to be taken to Liberty Jail in Clay County. The reason why Clay County was because there wasn't another place large enough to hold them. Lifting his and when Joseph Smith went into prison, he lifted his hat and said in a distinct voice, "Good afternoon, gentlemen," and then he passed out of sight. It was kind of a almost a circus for them. Um, and yeah, and I think this is interesting. He says that being there was hell surrounded with demons. Um, the food sickened the prisoners is coarse and so filthy we could not eat until we were driven to it by hunger, and they'd throw it up anyway a lot of times. Just some really descriptive messages here. Rigdon gets out because early, discharged early, about 2 months in, I think, maybe 3 months, um, because he was so sick. He asked for an arraignment on that, or um, he just needed to be out, and he did get out. Perhaps most disheartening to the remaining prisoners was the idea that Latter-day Saint families, including their own, scattered, destitute, and driven throughout the state of Missouri. So they all had to listen to all the reports. And every time I've ever learned about this, it seemed like that was one of the things that really it got to Joseph Smith was hearing about the saints and them being driven. And Baldwin had learned that his son, also named Caleb, had been beaten nearly to death by the Missourian with hickory sticks. Thus, having been detained without the least shadow of testimony against him, Baldwin asked that the high hand of oppression cease, and he be acquitted of all charges. But they still do that. It talks about a few things that happened during that. But then the letters came, and 29 pages were written, talking a little bit, as it says here, um, was kind of a Pauline-like epistle, talking about how he's a prisoner for Jesus Christ's sake, um, and um, how he was suffering for the Savior. Yeah, like I say, I'm going quick through this because this is something you guys can read as well. Um, After rendering a soul-wrenching account of the callous, merciless acts of some of their Missouri neighbors, notice he says some instead of all. Then he gives 121, and Joseph's plea was not immediately answered. Now that's what I think is important to know, that it wasn't like all of these were given immediately, one after another, or like 121 wasn't given exactly together, but then it does come, and we're going to read it, so I'm not reading it here. Um, but the comforting words of Joseph Smith helped and reminded them that if they are faithful, they would have, they would be delivered. Joseph provided instructions on a number of additional matters. First, he directed how to conduct upcoming conference for the meetings, which would help them feel like they would be okay, those that are in prison. Another item of business was to purchase property in Ohio territory, and Iowa territory. Kind of talked about that last time. That I forget who it was that they were going to have um, some purchasing of the land in Iowa, not just in Ohio, where Kirtland is, but in Iowa as well. The letter then turned to why many are called and few are chosen through the words of Jesus used in the New Testament. Um, and then reminds us that gentleness, meekness, and long suffering and kindness, love and virtue, um, which we'll read as well. And he continued to talk about the persecutions, big reason why, and to get side affidavits of their grievances and maltreatment without a guarantee of receiving anything in return. This is what the Lord wanted them to do, and fulfilling the commandment given by the Lord so that they could give it to the heads of their government. Um, and basically, it says that all this lengthy letter was given, put in the Times and Season, Millennial Star, and the Deseret News several times, and then eventually extracts were canonized into the scriptures we're going to read this week. And those pages continue to provide comfort and direction to anyone mining the scriptures for meaning. And it's true, it's some of the strongest scriptures that I read, and I'm looking forward to getting into them this week. But all the prisoners ultimately crossed Illinois, finally reuniting with their families and friends and the rest of Latter-day Saint refugees. And I hope that we can learn from these things this week. And I hope we have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow when we really get into what happened in Liberty Jail.